You know that feeling when you find out something about someone you thought you knew everything about? That moment when the perfect image shatters and you realize there was so much more beneath the surface? Well, that's exactly what happened when Ryan Melcher, at 41 years old, finally broke his silence about his grandmother, the legendary Doris Day. And what he revealed wasn't just surprising. It was heartbreaking, shocking, and it changed everything we thought we knew about America's sweetheart. For 14 years, Ryan didn't see his grandmother. 14 years. He found out about her death not through a phone call, not through family, but through a Facebook post. Imagine that. Your own grandmother dies, and you learn about it the same way you'd find out about a stranger's passing.
But why?
What could possibly keep a grandmother and grandson apart for over a decade? The answer involves manipulation, money, secrets, and a hidden life that Doris Day kept locked away behind the gates of her Carmel estate. And now, her grandson is finally telling the truth. Let's start from the beginning, because Doris Day's story isn't what you think it is. Sure, you know the songs. You've heard Sera, Sera 1,000 times. You've seen her smile in those classic Hollywood films, that radiant, sunny, girl-next-door smile that made America fall in love with her. But behind that smile was a woman who knew pain intimately, who survived things that would have broken most people, and who built walls so high around herself that even her own family couldn't get through. Doris Day was born Doris Mary and Kappelhoff on April 3, 1922, in Cincinnati, Ohio. From the very beginning, tragedies seemed to follow her. Her older brother Richard had died before she was even born, and that loss cast a shadow over her childhood. Her parents, Alma and William, had a turbulent marriage filled with arguments and instability. Young Doris found her escape in dance, and she was good, really good. By the time she was 15, she dreamed of becoming a professional dancer, and that dream seemed within reach. But then came the accident that would change everything. On October 13, 1937, 15-year-old Doris was riding in a car with friends when they were hit by a train. A train. The impact was devastating. Her right leg was shattered, crushed so badly that doctors didn't know if she'd ever walk normally again, let alone dance. For over a year, she was confined to her home, her dreams of dancing professionally destroyed in a single moment. But here's where the Doris Day we know began to emerge. Instead of giving up, instead of surrendering to despair, she found another outlet: singing. Her mother, Alma, paid for singing lessons, and Doris would spend hours listening to the radio, teaching herself to sing along with Ella Fitzgerald. She had a natural talent, a warmth and sweetness in her voice that was undeniable. By 1939, at just 17 years old, she was singing with local bands and soon caught the attention of bandleader Barney Rapp, who gave her the stage name that would become legendary, Doris Day. It sounded wholesome, American, optimistic, everything she would come to represent. But even as her career was beginning, her personal life was already falling apart. In 1941, at just 19 years old, Doris married Al Jordan, a trombone player she'd met while performing. It should have been the start of a beautiful life together, but instead, it became her first experience with real terror. Al Jordan was violent, terrifyingly violent. He was physically and psychologically abusive, and when Doris became pregnant, the abuse intensified. She later described him as a psychopathic sadist, someone who took pleasure in her pain. On February 8, 1942, she gave birth to their son, Terrence Paul, known as Terry. Just weeks later, Doris fled, taking baby Terry with her and filing for divorce. She was 20 years old, a single mother with no money and a newborn baby, trying to make it in the male-dominated world of big band music. But she kept singing. She had to. It was her only way to survive. Her big break came when she joined Les Brown and his band of renown. In 1945, she recorded Sentimental Journey, and it became an instant hit, selling over 1 million copies. The song became an anthem for soldiers returning home from World War II, and suddenly, Doris Day was a star. Hollywood came calling, and in 1948, she made her film debut in Romance on the High Seas. She was electric on screen, beautiful, charming, with a voice that could make you believe in happy endings. Throughout the 1950s, she became one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, appearing in hit after hit: Calamity Jane, The Pajama Game, Pillow Talk. She was nominated for an Academy Award. She had the #1 television show in America. She was everywhere, and America couldn't get enough of her. But while her career soared, her personal life remained a battlefield. Her second marriage, to saxophonist George Weidler, lasted only 2 years. Then, in 1951, she married Martin Melcher, who became not just her husband but her manager and the man who would control every aspect of her career for the next 17 years. At first, it seemed like a good partnership. Martin was charming, seemed devoted to Doris and her son Terry, and under his management, Doris's career reached new heights. He negotiated her contracts, managed her money, made all her business decisions. She trusted him completely. She had no reason not to. They were married for 17 years, and during that time, Doris believed she was building financial security for herself and her family. She worked constantly, films, television, recordings, and assumed that all that hard work was paying off, that the millions she was earning were safely tucked away, invested, growing. And then Martin Melcher died. On April 20th, 1968, Martin suffered a massive heart attack and died suddenly. Doris was devastated by the loss, but she was about to discover something that would devastate her even more. As she began to go through Martin's financial records with her new lawyer, she made a horrifying discovery. She was broke. Not just broke, she was millions of dollars in debt. Martin Melcher and his business partner, Jerome Rosenthal, had made a series of disastrous investments with her money, losing everything. They had invested in oil wells that never produced oil, in hotels that never made profits, in schemes that were doomed from the start. Even worse, Martin had signed Doris up for a television series without consulting her, a 5-year commitment that she was legally bound to fulfill. She had believed she was financially set for life, but instead, she had nothing. Actually, worse than nothing. She owed approximately $500,000, which in today's money would be several million. Can you imagine that betrayal? The man she'd trusted with everything, the man she'd been married to for 17 years, had destroyed her financially. But Doris being Doris, she didn't collapse. She didn't give up. Instead, she fought back. She sued Jerome Rosenthal for malpractice and mismanagement, and after a long legal battle, she was awarded $22.8 million in damages. But here's the thing about legal victories. They don't undo the emotional damage. They don't restore trust. They don't heal the wounds of betrayal. Doris Day had spent her entire adult life working, trusting that her hard work was building something secure, only to discover it had all been a lie. That kind of betrayal changes you. It makes you suspicious. It makes you build walls. And that's exactly what Doris did. Now, let's talk about her son, Terry Melcher, because his story is intimately connected to one of the darkest chapters in American history. Terry grew up in Hollywood, surrounded by fame and music, and like his mother, he had incredible talent. He became a successful music producer, working with some of the biggest names in the industry. He produced hits for the Byrds, including Mr. Tambourine Man. He worked with Paul Revere and the Raiders. He was living in a beautiful house on Cielo Drive in Los Angeles, dating actress Candice Bergen, living the Hollywood dream. And then he met Charles Manson. In 1968, Terry was introduced to Charles Manson by Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. Manson was trying to make it as a musician, and he was desperate for someone with Terry's connections to give him a record deal. Terry visited Manson's commune at Spawn Ranch, listened to his music, and ultimately decided not to work with him. He thought Manson's music wasn't good enough, and he was increasingly disturbed by the strange, violent energy around Manson and his followers. So Terry said no, and he moved out of the house on Cielo Drive. The new tenants who moved in were film director Roman Polanski and his pregnant wife, actress Sharon Tate. On August 9, 1969, members of the Manson family broke into that house and murdered Sharon Tate and 4 other people in one of the most horrific crimes in American history. For years, there was speculation that the murders were meant for Terry Melcher, that Manson had ordered his followers to kill everyone at that address as revenge for Terry's rejection. Terry himself believed this for the rest of his life. He was haunted by the murders, traumatized by the knowledge that if he'd still been living there, it might have been him. Some reports suggest that Doris Day herself may have inadvertently saved her son's life. Terry had told his mother about Manson, about the strange, threatening behavior, and some accounts suggest that Doris, sensing danger, convinced Terry to move. Whether that's true or not, the Manson connection cast a dark shadow over both Terry's life and Doris's. It was another trauma, another layer of pain in a life that had already seen far too much. After the disaster of her third marriage, Doris married once more, to Barry Comden, in 1976. That marriage was also tumultuous and ended in divorce in 1981. By then, Doris was done with marriage. She was done with Hollywood. She was done with fame. She had spent decades being America's sweetheart, smiling for the cameras, singing about love and happy endings, when her own life had been marked by violence, betrayal, and loss. So she did what many people only dream of doing. She walked away. She retired to a beautiful home in Carmel, California, a secluded estate where she could finally find some peace. And she dedicated the rest of her life to the cause that had always brought her the most genuine joy: animals. Doris Day's love for animals wasn't just a hobby or a celebrity cause. It was a passion that defined the second half of her life. In 1978, she founded the Doris Day Pet Foundation, which later became the Doris Day Animal Foundation. She also founded the Doris Day Animal League, which merged with the Humane Society of the United States. She fought tirelessly for animal welfare, lobbying Congress for stronger animal protection laws, speaking out against puppy mills, working to end cosmetic testing on animals, advocating for the humane treatment of farm animals. She rescued countless dogs and cats, often living with a house full of animals. For Doris, animals represented something humans had failed to give her: unconditional love, loyalty without betrayal, trust without manipulation. In Carmel, surrounded by her beloved pets, away from the Hollywood spotlight, Doris Day finally found something resembling peace. But that peace came at a cost, and that cost was isolation. Behind the walls of her Carmel estate, Doris Day became increasingly reclusive. She rarely gave interviews. She stopped making public appearances. She carefully controlled who had access to her, and that control would eventually extend to her own family. Which brings us back to Ryan Melcher, her grandson, and the heartbreaking 14-year separation that nobody outside the family knew about. Ryan Melcher is the son of Terry Melcher. He grew up knowing his famous grandmother, spending time with her, having a relationship with her. By all accounts, they were close, at least when he was young. But then Terry Melcher got sick. In the early 2000s, Terry was diagnosed with melanoma, a deadly form of skin cancer. He fought it for years, but on November 19, 2004, Terry Melcher died at the age of 62. For Doris, it was devastating. She had outlived her only child. The grief was overwhelming, incomprehensible. She had spent her whole life surviving traumas and betrayals, but losing Terry broke something fundamental in her. And here's where things get complicated, where the story takes a turn that Ryan Melcher has only recently begun to talk about publicly. After Terry's death, Ryan tried to maintain his relationship with his grandmother. He called her. He tried to arrange visits. He wanted to be there for her in her grief, and he needed her too. They were both mourning the same person, both trying to navigate the devastating loss of Terry. And, according to Ryan, they had plans to get together, to have dinner, to support each other. But then something strange happened. Those plans kept getting canceled. Phone calls weren't returned. Messages went unanswered. And Ryan began to realize that someone was blocking his access to his grandmother. That someone, according to Ryan, was Bob Bashara, Doris Day's business manager. Bob Bashara entered Doris Day's life in 2009, 5 years after Terry's death. He became her business manager and, over time, seemed to gain more and more control over her life. He managed her finances, oversaw her animal foundation, and, critically, controlled access to her. According to Ryan, Bashara told him that Doris didn't want to see him, that visits would be too upsetting for her, that she needed to be protected from emotional stress. But Ryan didn't believe it. He knew his grandmother. He believed that she did want to see him, that someone was manipulating the situation, keeping them apart for reasons that had nothing to do with Doris's well-being. For 14 years, this went on. 14 years. Ryan would hear about his grandmother through news reports or through social media. He'd see updates about her animal foundation or rare public statements, and he'd wonder why the woman who'd been his grandmother, who'd supposedly loved him, had completely cut him out of her life. And then, on May 13, 2019, Doris Day died at the age of 97. And Ryan Melcher, her only living blood relative, found out about it the way millions of strangers did, through a post on Facebook. He didn't get a phone call. Nobody from Doris's team reached out to him. He was learning about his grandmother's death at the same time as people who'd never met her, who only knew her from movies and songs. Can you imagine the pain of that? The anger? The sense of betrayal? Shortly after Doris's death, Ryan Melcher wrote a long, emotional post on Facebook explaining what had happened. He talked about how close he and his grandmother had been, how much he'd wanted to maintain that relationship after his father died, and how Bob Bashara had systematically blocked him from seeing her. He wrote, "I was told by Bashara that any and all communication will be cut off if I didn't back off." He went on to say that I will never see my grandmother again and will never receive anything of hers after she dies. No photos, no keepsakes, nothing. Ryan explained that Bashara had fired longtime staff members who'd been loyal to Doris for years, replacing them with people loyal to him. Ryan believed that Bashara was manipulating Doris, isolating her, possibly for financial gain. The response to Ryan's post was immediate and divided. Many people sympathized with him, believing his account and expressing outrage that he'd been kept from his grandmother. Others defended Bashara and suggested that Doris herself had wanted the separation, that she'd made her wishes clear and Ryan should respect them. Bob Bashara declined to comment directly, but had Doris's publicist, Charlie Walters, respond on his behalf. Walters claimed that Bashara believed Ryan was a great guy and that they'd discussed ways to facilitate contact between Ryan and Doris. He suggested that the situation was more complicated than Ryan was making it seem, that there were legitimate reasons for the boundaries that had been established. So, what's the truth? Was Doris Day really being manipulated by her business manager, kept prisoner behind the walls of her estate, isolated from her own grandson? Or did she genuinely want that separation, want to be left alone in her final years, and Ryan is simply unable to accept her wishes? The honest answer is we may never know for certain. What we do know is this. Doris Day was a woman who'd spent her entire life being controlled by men. Her first husband beat her. Her second marriage failed. Her third husband betrayed her financially, leaving her millions in debt. Her fourth marriage ended in divorce. Every time she trusted someone with her well-being, with her career, with her money, she'd been let down or betrayed. So it's not surprising that in her later years, she became extremely protective of her privacy, extremely cautious about who she let into her life. But there's also evidence that supports Ryan's version of events. Multiple former staff members have corroborated his claims that Bashara gained increasing control over Doris's life, that he fired longtime employees, that he restricted access to her. There are reports that Doris herself, in lucid moments, would express confusion about why she hadn't seen Ryan, would say she wanted to see him, but that visits kept getting postponed. It seems possible, even likely, that the truth is somewhere in the middle, that Doris, in her grief and increasing frailty, allowed someone she trusted to make decisions on her behalf, and that person, whether with good intentions or not, decided that isolating her from her family was what was best for her. What makes this even more poignant is what happened to Doris Day's estate. When she died, she left her entire fortune, every penny, to the Doris Day Animal Foundation. Ryan Melcher received nothing. Not a keepsake, not a photo, not a single item to remember his grandmother by. Everything went to the animals she'd loved so much. Now, there's something beautiful about that, right? Doris Day spent the last decades of her life fighting for animal welfare, and she put her money where her mouth was. The foundation continues to do important work, funding spay and neuter programs, supporting animal rescues, fighting against puppy mills and animal cruelty. That's a meaningful legacy. But it's also a devastating statement to her only grandson. It suggests that either Doris believed the animals needed her support more than Ryan did, or that someone convinced her that leaving everything to the foundation was the right choice. Ryan has been clear that he's not bitter about the money. He's made a successful career for himself as a real estate agent in Carmel, and he inherited from his father's estate, so he's financially secure. What he mourns is the relationship he lost, the time he could have spent with his grandmother in her final years, the conversations they never had, the memories they never made. He talks about how much he wanted to tell her about his life, to hear her stories about his father, to simply sit with her and be present. Instead, he got 14 years of silence and then a Facebook notification that she was gone. Now, here's what Ryan has revealed that we didn't know before, the secrets that Doris Day kept hidden for decades. First, the extent of her trauma. We knew about the abusive first marriage, about the financial betrayal by Ryan Melcher, but we didn't fully understand how deeply those experiences shaped her. Ryan talks about how his grandmother lived in constant fear of being taken advantage of, how she trusted almost no one, how the walls she built to protect herself eventually became a prison. He reveals that she struggled with deep depression, that behind the sunny smile was someone who carried enormous pain, who felt profoundly alone even when surrounded by people. Second, the Manson connection affected her more than anyone knew. The fact that her son had been friends with Dennis Wilson, had visited Spawn Ranch, had been a potential target of the Manson family, that haunted Doris for the rest of her life. She became paranoid about security, about who was allowed near her property, about anything that might endanger her or her family. That paranoia, born from a very real and terrifying situation, contributed to her increasing isolation. Third, her relationship with her son Terry was complicated. They loved each other deeply, but Terry had his own struggles. He battled depression and anxiety, particularly after the Manson murders. He dealt with the burden of being Doris Day's son, of constantly being compared to his famous mother, of trying to make his own mark in the music industry while living in her shadow. Doris felt guilty about that, guilty that her fame had complicated her son's life, and after his death, that guilt intensified. Ryan believes that his grandmother's grief over losing Terry was so profound that it made it difficult for her to be around him. He was a reminder of what she'd lost, and that pain was too much to bear. Fourth, the extent to which her business managers controlled her life. It wasn't just Bob Bashara. Throughout her life, Doris repeatedly found herself in situations where the people managing her career and finances had more information and more power than she did. She was an incredibly talented performer, but she wasn't business savvy, and she knew it. So she relied on others to handle those aspects of her life, and almost every time, it ended badly. By the time Bashara came into her life, she was in her 80s, her son was dead, and she was vulnerable. Whether Bashara had good intentions or not, he ended up with enormous control over someone who'd already been betrayed too many times. And fifth, perhaps most heartbreakingly, Doris Day died believing she'd done the right thing. She believed that leaving everything to her animal foundation was the best way to continue the work that mattered most to her. She may have believed that Ryan was financially secure and didn't need her support. She may have been told that he didn't want to see her, or that visits would be too disruptive, or that focusing on her foundation was more important than maintaining family relationships. Whatever she believed, she died without reconciling with her grandson, without having a final conversation, without saying goodbye. Ryan Melcher's decision to speak out, to reveal these secrets, isn't about revenge or bitterness. When you listen to him talk about his grandmother, you hear love. You hear sadness. You hear someone who desperately wishes things had been different, who grieves not just for her death, but for all those lost years when they could have been together. He wants people to know that Doris Day, for all her talent and success and philanthropy, was also deeply wounded, deeply human, and that her story doesn't have a happy Hollywood ending. It has a complicated, messy, heartbreaking ending, just like so many real lives do. What can we learn from Doris Day's story? Perhaps that fame and success don't protect you from pain. That surviving one trauma doesn't make you immune to the next one. That sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves end up keeping out the people who love us most. That trusting the wrong people can have consequences that last a lifetime. And that even America's sweetheart, the woman who sang about whatever will be, struggled with the same fears and heartbreaks that all of us face. Doris Day gave us so much joy through her music and her films. She made us believe in happy endings, in love conquering all, in the power of optimism and resilience. But behind that radiant smile was a woman who knew darkness intimately, who survived abuse and betrayal and loss, who built an empire and then lost it, who outlived her only child and spent her final years isolated from her only grandchild. That's the real story, the one she kept hidden for decades, the one her grandson is now brave enough to tell. When you watch Pillow Talk or Calamity Jane, when you hear Sera, Sera, or Secret Love, remember that the woman singing was someone who understood pain as deeply as she understood joy. She wasn't just America's sweetheart. She was a survivor. She was a woman who kept going even when life knocked her down again and again. She was someone who, in her own flawed and complicated way, tried to make the world better for the creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. And she was a grandmother who, for reasons we may never fully understand, spent her final years separated from the grandson who loved her and wanted nothing more than to be by her side. Ryan Melcher is 41 years old now. He spent more of his life without his grandmother than with her. He's processing not just her death, but all those lost years, all those missed opportunities, all those things that were never said. He's sharing his story, not to tarnish her legacy, but to complete it, to show the full picture of who Doris Day really was. Not a one-dimensional icon, but a complex, wounded, resilient human being who did the best she could with the hand she was dealt. So the next time you hear one of her songs or see one of her movies, take a moment to appreciate not just the performance, but the person behind it. Remember that every smile has a story, that every life contains multitudes, that the people we think we know often carry secrets we can't imagine. And maybe, in understanding Doris Day's complicated, heartbreaking story, we can find compassion not just for her, but for all the people in our own lives who are struggling behind their smiles, who are building walls to protect themselves, who need connection even when they push it away. Doris Day once sang, Sera, Sera, whatever will be, will be. But the truth is, so much of what happened in her life wasn't inevitable. It was the result of choices, some made by her, many made by others. And now, thanks to her grandson's courage in speaking out, we know the truth about what was hidden for so long. It's not the fairy tale ending Hollywood would have written, but it's the real one. And maybe, in its own painful way, that's more valuable. Because real stories, even heartbreaking ones, remind us that we're all human, that we all struggle, and that the most important thing we can do is show up for each other, especially when it's hard. Doris Day's life teaches us that lesson more powerfully than any movie ever could.